GDPR 2018 is the year of the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. It comes into effect in May 25th this year. And what it looks to do, which I think when the regulators in Europe, this applies to Europe, looked at this, they wanted to do three things. They wanted to modernize the legal framework to protect consumers, strengthen individual rights for consumers, and then the third thing, which is important, is bring consistency and clarity around the rules, because these are general rules for Europe that apply to all 28 member states, but the application of those rules are done by individual sort of data protection authorities in each country. So it's actually a good thing because it brings a lot of clarity and consistency for businesses. And so once you apply it and you're consistent with one, you're consistent across all the states. So we see it as a very good development overall. And as when we get into sort of what it means specifically and how prepared we are, we feel quite good about where we stand today.
So could you just sort of explain, maybe high level, how it changes operations or the demands of companies, vendors, publishers, marketers? What does it mean, or what are some of the major demands, if you will?
So if you boil it down, there's the most important thing is how you look for sort of awareness and approval from consumers. And it defines two different specific approvals. One is explicit approval for consumer to be able to track data, and another one is unambiguous. Explicit applies to very sensitive data like, race, religion, sex, gender, etc. All these things are very sort of they're very sensitive data, and so they ask for an explicit consent, and that is an opt-in. So a consumer has to actually opt in to be able to share that data. And then there's a whole other category for non-sensitive data under which sort of cookies and the tracking of your sort of activity on websites apply, and that's unambiguous consent. So unambiguous consent falls into, so you can describe it as three different things. One is you have to be explicit and clear about what it is that you're tracking and what use you're going to make of that data. But then the consent itself requires the consumer to take an action, not an opt-in, but an action like continue to browse on a website, and needs to have a very clear opt-out. So, one of the implementations that exist out there, and the implementation we've had now for many, many years, is sort of having a notice on the website that says, hey, we're about to track your information on this website for the purposes of X, Y, and Z. And then if you as a consumer choose to click beyond this page, you're actually opting in to sharing the data. Otherwise, here's a button to opt out. So that's unambiguous consent, and it defines very clearly these two categories, something that wasn't as clear before. So we're very happy with this because, one, we've been having high sort of standards of privacy since the inception of the company. We were founded in 2005. We're founded in Europe, and so privacy has always been a very strict thing in European regulations. So we've always been sort of compliant with it. And sort of, one of the things that we've done since the beginning, since 2008, is being part of the Ad Choices program. The Ad Choices program, which is the little triangle you see in the banners, is actually a program that allows you to, through one click, see how your data is used, for what purpose, and then opt out very clearly. In addition, we've also complied with a number of what are now regulations under GDPR for a while. So, for example, GDPR now requires to have a data privacy officer, which we've had since 2013, and we have a number of programs in the company that sort of incorporate privacy in everything we do. We have this program that we call Privacy by Design in the company. The privacy officer in the company is part of the product team, and any product that we develop goes through a very specific step of privacy, and we do a sort of frequent assessment of what our privacy position is and any sort of like potential weaknesses that we have so that they're corrected, and there's training to everyone in the company around privacy. So again, like from the perspective of Criteo, GDPR is a good thing because it ensures consistency, and we've been compliant for a while. So for our clients, we believe also it's not a change the way we're implementing sort of the tracking on our client sites is compliant with GDPR, but in addition to that, we're sort of acting as a consigliere to these sites, to e-commerce sites, to make sure they understand what the practices are around GDPR and sort of provide best practices around compliance. So all in all, I think it's a very good thing. And the biggest thing in business is to have clarity and consistency, and that's what GDPR brings. And then from a consumer perspective, it brings trust because, again, you go to any of these countries, the rules are very clear and they protect consumers.
So Eric, as you speak to your colleagues in the business and colleagues in the U.S. and in Europe and around the world, how do you see sort of preparation, the expectation, and what is your opinion or forecast of what's going to happen in May when we gather in Cannes, let's say in June? Will the world end, or
no?
What's going on?
No, the world will not end. This is really an evolution. I mean, what I described is we're now taking some of the practices that were already in place, certainly for us, and now making them sort of the same across the member states. So that's a good thing. It's an evolution. There is explicit consent that's required from consumers for very sensitive data. We don't capture that data. Some sites might capture that data, but a lot of those sites are already very sort of aware that that's an area where they need to be compliant. And so, for those sites that haven't been very aware of privacy and haven't been sort of, which I think it's far and in between, it might be something new that they need to implement, but it's not something that's difficult to implement, and it makes complete sense. So think of it again as an evolution as opposed to evolution. There's no going to be sort of an end of the world. It's just going to be business as usual. But people have to be sort of clear about their practices around privacy, which is good. I've always talked to people about making sure that you have two big principles when you talk about data, which is at the end sort of something that consumers should have a big say on how it's used. One is transparency, so the ability to show people what data is being collected and for what purpose, and the other one is control. Right? And so what GDPR does for consumers, it ensures that those principles are well embedded within what every country within the 28 member states of the EU has to do. And so I think it's a very good thing, because if you think about consumers today, let's say that I'm a consumer in Italy or in France, and I still have some concern about doing shopping online or visiting sites because I don't know what's happening to my data, and there's no clear regulation that gives me confidence. What this does is it provides confidence to consumers that they're actually being protected, and they have a say, and they can at any point in time basically say, you know what, I don't want to sort of have any tracking of my data, I want to sort of opt out. So that trust is very important for the ecosystem. The more trust there is in the online ecosystem, the more activities will happen from consumers and the more comfortable they will be. Now, you have to understand, most consumers are aware. We did a sort of Criteo Ipsos survey. Most consumers, 90% of them, are aware of behavioral targeting, and 75% of them say that they prefer having sort of targeted advertising than not. And so, all in all, I think there's also a certain understanding that a lot of the free services they receive are because they're advertising supported models by those companies that provide those free services. And so there's a tacit agreement that, hey, look, as long as the rules are clear and I can trust the system, I'm very happy to move forward. So I think this is a very important step in sort of creating confidence in the consumer mind around data, which is such an important element of the future of the ecosystem.